The Prisoner's Dilemma, as written by James Rachels, assumes that you live in a totalitarian society. You have been arrested and accused of conspiring against the state with a man that you have never met named Smith. The two of you are being held in separate rooms and being interrogated, and the police make it pretty clear that they aren't really interested in the truth. They're just looking for a quick conviction. They do offer you a deal if you do end up confessing, and it sounds like it would be a lot better for you to confess the way that they make it out to be. So very quickly, we're going to go over what choices you actually have in this situation. In this situation, you're really only left with two options. You can either confess to a crime that you did not commit, or deny any involvement. Now, of course, Smith is being offered the exact same deal as you, so he's left with the same two choices. You are told by the cops that if you both confess, you will each receive 5 years in prison. However, the benefit to confessing is that if you confess and Smith does not, you will go free while he spends 10 years in prison. The opposite is true if you deny and Smith confesses. However, if you both keep quiet, there won't be enough evidence against you, and you will each only receive 1 year. So in this situation, it seems obvious that for the best result, no matter what Smith does, the right thing to do is confess. Because if Smith confesses, 10 years is more than 5 years, so you'd rather confess and only get 5 years. If Smith keeps quiet, a year is longer than no time at all, so you'd rather confess to go free instead of spending a year in prison. However, it may seem like it's an obvious choice, but Smith is going to be thinking the exact same thing. So he will confess as well, and rather than both only getting 1 year, you will both get 5 years. And this is the dilemma. To get the best possible result for everybody, you have to act against your own self-interest and deny any involvement rather than confessing, so that each of you can only get 1 year rather than 5. Obviously, you can throw out all the debate if you and Smith are allowed to discuss. You can both say, hey, we're going to remain silent, get 1 year each, and then be out scot-free. But, of course, the authorities aren't letting you talk to each other, probably for that exact reason. Now, the moral quandary comes in, should you sell out Smith for your own self-interest? Because obviously if you sell out, you are guaranteed not to get 10 years. And that's where the moral quandary comes in, because you're basically lying to the authorities to try to get the best result for yourself. Even if it doesn't work out that way and you end up getting 5 years instead of 1, the reason you confess to a crime you didn't commit is to attempt to get the best possible result for yourself, even if it's at the expense of somebody else, who presumably is also innocent like yourself. So the Prisoner's Dilemma, while it is basically talking about, is it best to act in your own self-interest or the self-interest of the group? And the big moral quandary is, should you double-cross people because it may get you a better result? If you followed the teachings of Immanuel Kant, you might think of the problem like this. His categorical imperative basically states that you should only take an action if that action could be seen as a universal law. So, killing is wrong because if we lived in a society where you could just go around killing people without any consequences, society would fall apart. You could never count on anybody to be there because they could just die the next day. So, by confessing to a crime you didn't commit, you are lying in order to try to gain some advantage for yourself, or perceived that way. At least trying to mitigate getting the worst possible sentence. So that means by the categorical imperative, you cannot confess because that would be lying, and society cannot be built on lies. Therefore, you have to deny any involvement with the crime, and even if that gives you 10 years in prison, well, that's on Smith. He broke the categorical imperative. He is the person in the wrong, even though you are spending time in jail. Utilitarianism, which is also called the greatest happiness principle, basically states that an action becomes right because it brings about the most happiness or pleasure. Now, some people are kind of short-sighted and only think about themselves, so they would say the best action to take is to confess, because it's the only action you can take that could possibly let you go free without any jail time. But it's called the greatest happiness principle, basically because it nets everyone involved their happiness that they experience from the action and combines it together, and whichever one amounts to the greatest is the correct action to take. So in this situation, both of you denying would bring about the most happiness. If both of you confess, there is a net of 10 years in prison spent, 5 each. If one of you confesses and the other denies, well, one of you is going to prison for 10 years and the other is going free. So again, it's netting 10 years in prison. If both of you deny involvement, there's only a net of 2 years, 1 year each. So 2 years in prison brings about less unhappiness and more happiness than 10 years. So the correct choice, the moral choice, according to utilitarianism, is for both of you to deny. So my thoughts for how this should be solved, given all these different ethical theories and really my own self-interest, would be to deny. Because if everybody just assumed that confessing was the best thing to do because of the chance for getting out of jail, we couldn't live in a society where people just backstab each other over and over and over again because it looks best for them. In the real world, people remember that kind of thing. And if you're known for that, then people are just going to, go against you and get you a worse result overall. So if we live in a society where we can teach people that sometimes acting in purely your own self-interest can actually have the opposite effect. By working and cooperating together, we can form a much better solution than if we all acted on our own. Now, of course, since you're not allowed to communicate with Smith, it becomes very hard to enforce this kind of deal. I mean, nobody is going to always act ethically, and there's never going to be perfect humans. So even if you reason out, hey, if we both deny, it's better for both of us, Smith may think that, hey, if I confess, it means I'm never getting that 10 years. So it is a rational conclusion that Smith comes to, but it's not necessarily the best solution or the most moral solution. So obviously all this leads to kind of a little bit of paranoia, where you could think, well, I better confess because there's nothing guaranteeing that Smith is going to be a moral person and I may end up serving the full 10 years. So in this situation, if we can just all work together and deny that we had any involvement in this situation, it would work out better for everybody. Obviously, it's not always going to work out that way, but as long as you work that way, people will remember your good actions and that you are willing to cooperate with everybody else. It'll look good on you, and eventually it should catch up with you. So that's my thoughts on the prisoner's dilemma, and thanks for listening.